Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning Five here on Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. I am Dave Biddle. I am joined by Patrick Murphy. Patrick, it's time for the state of the Ohio State basketball program address. I know we're prisoners of the moment. We all are, especially with our sports teams, but Buckeyes, we're looking good. As recent as last week, then they were upset at Maryland, did not look good at all on Sunday, lost by 15 in a game they were favored. And then last night just cannot happen. Listen, you're playing at home. Nebraska is the worst team in the Big Ten. Ohio State was favored by 15. They had a win probability of 95.5% according to ESPN's Basketball Power Index, and they lose that game 78-70. And it's one of those things where it's like EJ Liddell played great, and they still lost the game. We're going to do a deep dive on the program. Just where are you at with this year's team right now?
I think it's tough to judge a team in a season, especially in a tournament style postseason like we've got. I think, we'll make our final decision on what this team is at the end. But if we're just talking right now, you said it right. Last night can't happen. Now, let's be clear. Nebraska's played some better basketball of late. They went into Penn State, and I think they won by 20-some points, which is a good win. Teams don't generally go into Penn State and get wins like that. But as you mentioned, Dave, this is still, the bottom of the Big Ten. I think that you can't excuse this as just like, oh, that's a disappointing loss, we'll move on. I think there's some concerning trends here, and Chris Holtmann addressed it after the game. Their defensive numbers are very bad. They've been bad all season, frankly. They dropped to number 121 nationally, according to KenPom, in defensive rating after last night's performance. They weren't great before that. They were, I think, 98, if I remember correctly. So that's a problem. The rebounding has become a huge issue, and that's not a size of the players thing. Nebraska doesn't have a Kofi Coburn, and Ohio State actually handled him pretty well. It's an effort. You lose a guy like Kyle Young last night early in that game, and it just kind of went out the window, other than, as you mentioned, EJ Liddell. But they've got to rebound better. And those are two things that you can generally look at a team and say, okay, you play good defense, you rebound well. Maybe you don't shoot the ball well. If you have a guard who can do some things, those are teams that make runs in tournaments. And right now, Ohio State doesn't have a guard that can break guys down. Malachi Branham's been great the last several games, not so much the last two. But he's not a guy who can just take a guy off the dribble. He needs a screen. He needs a play run for him. He's young, and that's just not his game. And they don't rebound well, and they're not playing defense. And there's 2 games left in the regular season. So it's certainly tough. Chris Holtmann addressed a lot of this last night and was pretty candid. And, I'm working on a story right now kind of from all that, but you can watch the video on our site. I thought he gave a pretty honest assessment of where this team is and frankly said it's not good enough. So, it's as you mentioned, Dave, prisoner of the moment type of thing. You saw this team win at Illinois. That was a really good win on the road, a lot of heart, a lot of effort. And then these last 2 games, I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if these guys started to read their headlines a bit too much. I don't know what the issue is, but they've got figured out. 2 more games before Sunday, which is a lot to ask of guys that aren't playing great right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this later, but let's address this now since you mentioned it. Losing Kyle Young was huge. Now, still, you cannot lose in Nebraska at home even without Kyle Young, but that hurt them big time last year not having Kyle Young in March. What's the update with Kyle Young? What's the update with Zed Key? What's the update with maybe even Justice Suing, who has only played 2 games this year? What are you hearing about those 3 guys? I know you were there covering the game last night.
So starting with Kyle, they said that it was an illness. And he'll be continuously evaluated. I'm wondering if illness means concussion. He got hit in the face. Right. I believe in the chin early on, took another hit before he went out.
He got called for a foul on the play.
Yes. Yeah, he did. Yeah. And then he went to the locker room. Now he came back to the bench. And if he was showing any concussion symptoms, I imagine they don't let him come back out to the lights and the noise. But given that Kyle Young's gone through this, had vertigo issues and things. It's entirely possible. I'm no medical professional, but I've seen concussions before. It's entirely possible that he was feeling fine, except for his head was hurting. And then he gets to the locker room, they test him again, and then, or he starts getting sick. That can happen with concussions too. So this is me entirely speculating, but I'm a little bit concerned that Kyle Young may be dealing with more than just an illness. He looked fine to me early on. That's a guess. Zed Key, I actually walked into the arena at the same time as him. He was in a boot. I said, that doesn't look fun. He said, no, it wasn't fun when it happened. Now, Chris Holtmann said after the game that Zed Key was going through a lot of therapy on his ankle that he injured against Maryland, wants to be back, obviously, for this run for the Buckeyes. And that's important. Kyle Young's effort is always good, but to have your big man in there is going to be really important in these last couple games and going into the Big Ten tournament. They're going to be cautious with him, though. As I wrote in my story, I think Michi Johnson, when he rolled his ankle, missed 10 days, which was 2 or 3 games. So it wouldn't surprise me if Zed Key's next game is either Sunday against Michigan at home or Big Ten tournament. And then Justice Suing, this is such a tough one to read because they've been cautious with it. Chris Holtmann mentioned, I think it was on the radio show this week, about, Justice has to be 100%. I don't know if that means Justice feels he needs to be 100%. Ohio State wants Justice to be 100%. But then Chris Holtmann made an interesting comment last night, and this was kind of offhanded. He mentioned season-ending injuries, plural. And I wanted to ask him about that, if that meant they decided to hold off on Justice Suing for the rest of the year. And maybe he just misspoke and was referring to the fact that Seth Towns is out for the year and Justice Suing has essentially been. But we didn't have time to follow up on that. So, I'm not counting on Justice Suing at this point. This is the team they've got as far as I can tell. If Justice Suing comes back, great, but he's not going to be the Justice Suing that was playing really good basketball at the end of last year. He hasn't played all season except for those first 2 games. So I don't think you can count on him to be a big contributor. Now, if he can play a couple games in the Big Ten tournament, get back in practice, maybe he makes a little bit of a difference in the NCAA tournament. But I think Justice Suing, if I'm him, I'm looking at next year, coming back for another year and trying to make an impact with a fully healthy season ahead of him.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Speaking of Seth Towns, he did his best Vernon Hargreaves impersonation coming off the bench. I know Vernon Hargreaves was celebrating in the Super Bowl. Seth Towns was, I don't know what he was doing. There wasn't like there was like really a fight. You don't need to come on there and act all like tough guy and get yourself a technical and get thrown out of the game. That was just, you can't do stuff like that. So he wins the Vernon Hargreaves Award for the night last night. Unbelievable. All right. Let's get down to what I really wanted to talk about. So it's year 5 of the Chris Holtmann era. Now, full disclosure, you and I both like Holt a lot personally. Let's put that aside. I think he's a good man. I do think he's a good coach. But, man, I mean, it's year 5. It's not year 2. It's not year 3. It's year 5. The product should be better than this. It just should be. And right now they're 23rd in the country. They're going to drop out of the rankings most likely. Now, if they beat Michigan State and Michigan, well, they'll probably stay in the rankings. But that was a terrible loss last night. It's year 5. Listen, I'm not jumping off bridges or anything here. I like Holtmann. He's got a great recruiting class coming in next year. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's year 5, Patrick. Where are you at with this program? Should it be better, or are you happy with where it's at right now?
I think we all want it to be better. I think Chris Holtmann wants it to be better.
But should it be better?
Yeah, it should. And I, it's tough because I think it's easy. You mentioned prisoner of the moment. I think that's where we are. I think if we would have had this conversation after the Illinois game, after the Duke game, after that home game against Wisconsin, we're saying something different. Mm-hmm. But there are some alarming things that keep happening. The February to March trends under Chris Holtmann aren't good. I did the math last night. I think he's something like 9-11 in March, including the run to the Big Ten tournament championship game last year. I think there are some weird circumstances. And when I asked Gene Smith about this, when we met with him, he brought up that, this team does need to start winning championships. We want to win championships, but he also understood some things that had happened. The 2000 NCAA tournament that gets canceled, that team was playing well, looked like a team that could have made a bit of a run. Who knows what would have happened there, but if that team makes it to a Sweet 16, that changes the perception on Chris Holtmann. Ifs, what's, whatever. Last year's team was unexcusable, but they did come an overtime game away from winning a Big Ten tournament title. So I'm not trying to make excuses for Chris Holtmann. I think he admits that it's got to be better. I also think looking at this season in particular, they planned going into July to have Dwayne Washington in this backcourt with Jamari Wheeler. They recruited Jamari Wheeler in the transfer portal from Penn State, defensive guard with an offensive guard, and then just a suing injury. And that's really changed a lot of what they've done. And again, I don't want to make excuses. I just think these are reasons things have not been as good. Now, you're at the end of the season. You are who you are, as I said before. And as you mentioned, Dave, that loss is inexcusable. But I think if we're looking at this season as a whole, as Chris Holtmann as a whole, he's won 20 games every time he's been here. They've been to the NCAA tournament. I also think that there's a perception of Ohio State basketball that sometimes may be greater than what this program is. Now, I do think this program should be getting closer to the Wisconsins of the world, who just won a Big Ten regular season title last night and has made Final Four runs. But very few programs have great athletic programs, have great football, basketball. It's hard to do. Ohio State has done it before, but they've also had really bad periods of basketball. And so, I'm kind of in the middle here. I'm not ready to throw out this coaching staff. I think they do a lot of good things. I think if you talk to basketball people, they really like a lot of what Chris Holtmann does. But it is easy to watch some of these games and just ask what's going on. I'm waiting to see what this class next year is going to do. I do think this rebuild after Thad Matta at the end of his tenure took longer than they expected. There were some bad eggs in the program that had to get out. I'm waiting to see. I look at it more, even though it is year 5, just in the way they had to build it, almost like year 3 of really getting his guys in here and stuff. And some of these guys haven't worked out. Justin Arns isn't doing much for the Buckeyes right now, and he's clearly a Chris Holtmann guy. Kyle Young's injury history, while you can't predict that in recruiting, is not helping the Buckeyes right now. So there is certainly
DJ Carton and Alonzo Gaffney and guys that were supposed to be cornerstones of the program right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that they should take heat for. I mean, DJ Carton's a guy, while he hasn't done a ton with Marquette, that's a guy that can handle the ball. You're not having to go out and get Jamari Wheeler, can do some things. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely blame to be put on Chris Holtmann and this staff. I'm not ready to advocate for anyone getting fired, anyone moving on. I think he's done a better job than, again, prisoner of the moment we give him credit for sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So let's look at the recruiting class coming in next year. If I'm telling you, if they had like the 50th ranked recruiting class coming in next year, and we're seeing the product on the court this year is good at times, but then bad at other times, where they're going to make the tournament, but are we confident that they're going to get past the first weekend? I'm not. They'll make the tournament. They'll be a tough out. There's no doubt about that. But I think right now, at least in my mind, that's kind of a saving grace for Chris Holtmann. He's got a fantastic recruiting class coming in next year. The number 5 recruiting class in the country in college basketball. For perspective, Ohio State signed a really good recruiting class in football. They were 4th. And everybody's like, that's a pretty good class. For Ohio State basketball to land the number 5 class in the country, that is great stuff right there. And it includes 4 guys. It's a 5-man class. It includes 4 guys that are high four-star prospects. 4 of the top 60 overall prospects in the country. I love this class. And I think, I don't know. I mean, Holtmann has an 8-year contract. This is year 5. It wasn't like he'd be going anywhere anyway. But that is huge right there. They have that great recruiting class coming in. Because I think one of the complaints about Holtmann, well, one of them is in-game coaching. Another one's that, is he maybe an average recruiter? This class coming in next year is wonderful.
Absolutely. And just real quick, you mentioned the NCAA tournament. I think we were talking after interviews last night, a couple guys, I think it was Bill Landis from The Athletic, pointed out that, E.J. Liddell, Malachi Branham, when you get into tournament settings, the NCAA tournament, I mean, when teams haven't seen those guys in person, Nebraska, Maryland, Wisconsin this was the second time they were playing these guys. It makes it much more difficult to plan to defend those guys. So I do think once this team gets in the tournament, if healthy, that's going to be tough to beat, because you just don't have the experience of playing a guy like E.J. Liddell, a guy like Malachi Branham. Plus, they'll have a few days off where they can actually practice before that. But anyway, to your point, Dave, about the recruiting class, yeah, this is when I think the clock really starts on Chris Holtmann. You get your guys in. We had a question about why teams like Kentucky and Duke get better as the season progresses. Well, they recruit 5-star kids, and Ohio State hasn't been able to consistently do that. Steve Hellwagon, after one of the recent losses, our colleague, did a big Twitter rant about how the talent in Ohio hasn't been what it was under Thad Matta. So Ohio State's had to go outside the state of Ohio to get a lot of their recruits. And obviously with a basketball program that isn't the football program, that becomes harder to do. Now they've done it with this class. You've got guys from Utah, Georgia, Missouri, Florida, and then Bowen Hardman from Cincinnati. So I think this is really when this class can be the one that either propels Ohio State under Chris Holtman and they start to be higher up in the Big Ten, higher than they've been, start winning things, make runs in NCAA tournaments, something they should have done already. I think this is when it really starts. And if this class, if they still struggle, they still have these February, March swoons under Chris Holtman, once this class gets on campus, then I think you start to ask questions, because these are guys that should step in and probably, based on what Ohio State's roster is going to look like, play right away. I mean, they're going to lose a good number of guys in key positions next year. And these young kids are going to have to step up and play, and they're good enough to do it. It's not like these are low 4-star, high 3-star kids that may need a couple years to develop. This is college basketball where you've got to be able to play if you're a highly ranked kid early. These kids want to get to the NBA. So, I think this is, like I said, the clock really starts when this class gets on campus. And that's not to excuse anything that happened last year, this year, any of the other years.
All right, switching gears. Let's talk some Ohio State football now. We are about 6 days away. What's that?
The fun stuff.
The fun stuff, right. Yes. They're not going to lose any games during spring football. They're going to go undefeated. Well, I guess
one team
will lose the spring game. That's true. I guess they could tie. I don't know. They probably wouldn't do that. Ryan Day wouldn't do that. They'd make sure one team won. Other team has to walk back to the WAC. I don't know if they still do that, but
I don't know.
They should. They should make them do that. I mean, what do you look? I mean, obviously the defense is going to be the biggest story with Jim Knowles, and you and I talked about that on last week's show, one of our shows last week. I'm just looking forward to gleaning as much as we can. We're not going to know, final results. We're not going to know the depth chart to a T leaving spring, but we're going to have a good idea. We're going to know, Jim Knowles likes, for example, let's say he likes Cade Stover as that hybrid outside linebacker defensive end. We're going to be able to know things like that. There's certain guys we can just pencil in right now. Tanner McAllister is going to be the starting free safety. Cam Brown, Denzel Burke starting corners, most likely. I mean, there's, anything can happen. If those guys stay healthy, I think they're locks. Can't wait to see guys like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer in their second year. Looking forward to seeing these linebackers take a step. Obviously, Jim Knowles coaches the linebackers in addition to being the defensive coordinator. He's nicknamed his linebackers the Regulators. I love that. A little shout out to the movie Young Guns there. Just your thoughts on spring ball opening up here next week.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, one, spring ball means football. It's not real, regular season football, but it's football. That it also means we're getting a spring, which means this cold weather. I was just in Puerto Rico for a few days and coming back to cold weather, even though it's not too bad in Columbus right now. I'm looking forward to that. But on the 60 field,
60 degrees, man. 60 degrees today.
Yeah, but I left the basketball game last night and it was 30 degrees, so we're still not there yet. We talked a lot about the defense. So I'm gonna kind of put that specifically to the side just because we've talked so much about it this offseason already. I'm really looking forward to these young guys coming in, the freshman class, the redshirt freshmen. I wrote something about the redshirt freshmen yesterday, kind of where these guys fit. What is CJ Hicks going to do? Where does he mix into this defense? Sonny Styles, guys like that, highly rated prospects that are going to have a chance. You've got a whole bunch of new eyes looking at this defense. So I think that there's guys on offense. And then to me, the quarterback position is interesting, not because of CJ Stroud, obviously, but the backup competition. Not only to be CJ Stroud's backup, but to set yourself up to be the potential starter in 2023. Kyle McCord obviously was the backup last year, so he has a leg up, has been in the program, has played in games. But Devin Brown, I liked what I saw, highlights of him. And then when we talked to him on National Signing Day, blew me away. I just thought he was great. The way he handled himself, he didn't look like a freshman. And a lot of Ohio State guys come in ready to give interviews. I mean, they give so many interviews in high school, but just his answers to things, the way he thought about some of the questions, the way he talked about playing the quarterback position, the way he was ready to compete right then. And not in the Tate Martell, I'm going to be the starter next year, even though there's 3 guys ahead of me type of way, but just that he wants to compete, and he didn't come to Ohio State to sit on the bench. I like that. So I'm really interested in kind of how the backup quarterback position will play out. I think it's going to be important. It probably won't be talked about a ton as much as last year when it was about the starters, even though we knew CJ Stroud was going to be the guy. But I think it's going to be interesting. And like I said, I think these guys can set themselves up for success in 2023. Both guys need more experience. Devin Brown needs to get in the game just in general. Kyle McCord only played in, I think, 5 games last year, didn't throw a ton of passes. So you whichever one is that number 2, there should be games this year where they get on the field, and that'll be important for their development.
Great stuff from Patrick Murphy. Really appreciate it, Patrick. Thank you to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. We appreciate that very much. If you like the show, like, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, all that great stuff. It really helps. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great day.